Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating explainer on a concept that, honestly, a lot of people think they already know all about. But there is just so much hidden beneath the surface here. We are talking about pentacles. Now, it's super easy to look at it just as, the day the early church got its official start. But as we'll see in our source material today, to really grasp what's happening, we have to view it as the thrilling climax of a much, much older story. Okay, here is our roadmap for today. We're going to build a complete picture by looking at the new Sinai, unity and diversity, a continuous creation, the mosaic of the church, and finally, the mission of forgiveness. Let's jump right in. Part 1, the new Sinai, from tables of stone to hearts of flesh. So our source material starts by setting the scene in Jerusalem. And it's important to remember that at this time, Pentecost was already a massive Jewish festival. It was actually one of the 3 great annual pilgrimage feasts, and it specifically celebrated the giving of the law to Moses on Mount Sinai. So picture this. Thousands of pious Jews were already gathered in fervent faith, ready to renew their covenant with God, completely oblivious to what was about to hit them. The texts give us this absolutely exhaustive list of the nationalities present that day. I mean, look at this. Parthians, Medes, Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Egypt, Rome, and so on. The city was literally packed with people from every known corner of the world. And this brilliantly illustrates that this wasn't just some isolated local incident. This was a gathering of all nations under heaven, setting the perfect stage for a truly universal message. Now let's look at how this builds on the Old Testament. The author carefully uses words like tongues of fire and a violent wind, which totally recalls the fire and thunder of Mount Sinai. But there's a really deep contrast happening here. At the first Sinai, God gave the written law on these rigid tablets of stone. In this new Sinai, God gives his very spirit writing the law on flesh, directly onto the human heart. It's a complete fulfillment where the true law liberates you from the inside out. For the author of Acts, this signifies the fulfillment of a very specific, very ancient promise. The prophet Joel once proclaimed, "I will pour out my spirit on all flesh." Think about what that meant for humanity. It meant the highly anticipated day of God had finally arrived. It wasn't just reserved for a select few prophets or kings anymore. This spirit was being poured out on literally everyone, represented by that massive, diverse crowd we just talked about. Moving right along to Part 2, Unity in Diversity, the Reversal of Babel. This brings us to a fascinating theological pivot, because this event directly responds to the famous Tower of Babel. If you recall, at Babel, humanity spoke one language and tried to build this massive tower. God intervened, scattered them, and confused their languages. But according to the source analysis, God didn't do this out of spite. She did it to spare humanity from the false path of strict, rigid uniformity. So Pentecost is the great reversal. Instead of one language leading to confusion, we have diverse languages uniting in love to understand a single universal message. It shows us that true unity is actually found in diversity. Which brings us to Part 3, a continuous creation, looking at Psalm 104. This brings us to a beautiful poem that really forces us to reframe how we view creation. We need to stop seeing it as just some ancient event and start seeing it as an ongoing relationship. Interestingly enough, the source notes that a very similar poem of awe was written by the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten around 1350 BC, praising the sun god. But this biblical text is different. It places the sun and moon firmly as mere creations, revealing a God who constantly, actively renews an entirely good creation. So, the absolutely crucial point here is that in the biblical tradition, the God who creates the universe is explicitly the God of the covenant. The text uses the divine 4-letter name, Yahweh He. This means the transcendent creator of the cosmos is intimately, personally connected to humanity. He's constantly renewing the face of the earth and actively inviting humanity to become true children of God through the gift of the Spirit. All right, Part 4, the mosaic of the church, found in 1 Corinthians 12. So we have to ask, how does this Spirit practically organize the people who receive it? Well, St. Paul writes something that completely challenged the norms of his time. He essentially throws human social and religious hierarchies right out the window. He says that in this new body, racial divisions, social ranks, and any feelings of superiority, they just no longer matter. Every single baptized person receives a manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. If we were to draw a picture of the church based on Paul's vision, it absolutely would not be a hierarchical pyramid with a boss at the very top and subordinates at the bottom. Not at all. The text beautifully describes it instead as a tight, bustling crowd gathered closely around someone. It's a relationship-centered community where everyone is indispensable. Ordination or titles don't confer superiority. They simply confer a specific mission of service within that crowd. And this idea is perfectly captured by the metaphor of a mosaic. Think about it. In a real mosaic, you don't want giant, identical, boring blocks of color, right? The art relies on the tiny pieces. The smaller, the more varied, and the more richly colored those individual pieces are, the more magnificent the final masterpiece becomes. Our diverse gifts and unique backgrounds are exactly what makes the community so beautiful when it's bound together by the Spirit. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds absolutely wonderful in theory, right? Unity and diversity, a beautiful, perfect mosaic. But human beings are messy. We divide, we fight, we hold grudges. So how on earth do we actually announce this love and practically overcome our very real, very deep divisions? And that dynamic pivot leads us to our final section, Part 5, the mission of forgiveness, looking at the Gospel of John, chapter 20. This leads us directly to the actionable, everyday mission that flows from Pentecost, set right on the evening of Easter. John paints an incredible parallel here. Think back to Genesis, where God breathes the breath of life into man. Now look at John 20. Jesus stands among his disciples and breathes on them to transmit the Spirit. He perfectly mirrors the Creator, initiating a radical, brand-new recreation of humanity right there, through his breath. And this is key, he doesn't just breathe on them so they can sit around feeling all peaceful and enlightened. He gives them a direct marching order. As the Father has sent me, even so I am sending you. The Holy Spirit is not given just for our own personal comfort. It is explicitly given for a mission. We are sent out into the world exactly as Jesus was sent into the world. And what exactly was that mission? Well, think about a lamb. A lamb absorbs violence without returning it. The text explains that the mission of these new followers is to actively break the spiral of hate and violence in the world. And their only weapon? The radical power of nonviolence and forgiveness. They're sent out as lambs to literally root out sin by forgiving it. Because, let's face it, actually forgiving people who hurt us is incredibly hard, and we often just completely forget how to do it. The source text uses a brilliant, beautiful metaphor here, comparing the Spirit to a prompter in a theater. You know, the person hiding off stage who whispers lines to the actors when they freeze up and forget what to say. When we are faced with hate and we have a total memory lapse on how to love, the Spirit intimately guides us, whispering the exact words and gestures of forgiveness we need in that very moment. We hold the power to either extend God's pardon or to withhold it, leaving the world stuck in its despair. We are meant to be active, vital participants in this ongoing, daily recreation of the world. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought. Will you take up this mission? Will you step out onto the stage of your own life and be the witness and the prompter of God's forgiveness in a world that has so desperately forgotten it? Really think about that as you go through your week.